You know, when you think of ancient Rome, what comes to mind? Probably the Colosseum, right? The conquering legions, the incredible aqueducts, all this magnificent stuff. But that's only one side of the coin. Today, we're going to pull back that shiny marble curtain and look at something much, much darker.
Yeah, this quote, it just hits you, right? A dark reality that history has often chosen to forget. Because for every celebrated triumph, for all that splendor, there were real people paying an absolutely unimaginable price. And their stories, well, they've been buried.
So in this explainer, we're diving deep into that brutal reality. We're going to focus on some of the most powerless people in the entire empire. Young men, boys really, who were forced into a life of servitude as male concubines for Rome's super rich.
Okay, to really get this, we have to kind of rewire our brains to the Roman way of thinking. This isn't about our modern ideas of consent or individual rights. In their world, it was all about a rigid, brutal hierarchy. Power was everything. And if you were a master, your desire, your whim, came before absolutely anything else. It was a system built from the ground up on pure exploitation.
So you gotta ask, how does a person, a living, breathing human being, get turned into a piece of property? Well, it wasn't an accident. It was a cold, methodical system designed to break someone down, piece by piece.
And this was the pipeline. It all starts with being captured during a war. Or maybe your family gets into so much debt they're forced to sell you. From that moment on, you're on a conveyor belt, really. A system designed to strip away who you are, your name, your family, your identity, until you're nothing more than an object with a price tag.
And that brings you to the slave market. I mean, can you even imagine the terror? You're standing there completely exposed while these strangers walk around you, poking and prodding, debating your price based on how old you look, where you're from. It's like a livestock auction. There's no person there in their eyes, just a product. It's about as dehumanizing as it gets.
And look at this, the level of detail is just chilling. It wasn't just a slave, it was incredibly specific. Buyers had a shopping list. You wanted someone who seemed refined and educated? You'd look for someone from Greece. You wanted someone with a fair complexion and a stronger build? You'd look for someone from a Germanic tribe. Entire groups of people were basically reduced to a brand, a checklist of features.
Once you were bought, it wasn't over. A lot of these young men were then sent to these so-called training schools, and you can think of them as being just as brutal as the schools for gladiators. But the goal here wasn't just about teaching them to play music or recite poetry to be, better entertainment. No, the real purpose was psychological. It was all about systematically breaking their spirit to make sure they'd be 100% compliant.
And this is a really, really important point. We've talked about the physical process, but the abuse went so much deeper. The psychological warfare, the mental manipulation, it was incredibly sophisticated. And honestly, in a lot of ways, it was even more destructive than the physical cruelty.
Just try to put yourself in their shoes for a second. Imagine being forced to smile, to seem happy and grateful, while every single part of your dignity is being ripped away. Living that lie, that contradiction, every single minute of every single day. The psychological weight of that is it's almost unthinkable.
These masters were absolute pros at mind games. Look at these techniques. They deliberately isolate people. They'd pit them against each other, creating this toxic competition so they could never trust one another or form any kind of bond. And maybe the sickest tool of all, kindness. They'd use kindness as a weapon. They'd give you a little bit, make you feel safe, and then snatch it away, leaving you totally confused and desperate for their approval. Even something like education, it wasn't a gift, it was just another way to mold them, to control their thoughts and turn them into the perfect companion.
So what's the end result of all this? A constant, gnawing anxiety. You're always on edge, never knowing if you're in their good graces or if punishment is right around the corner. It's a life lived in a permanent state of fear. And that confusion, that uncertainty, it makes it pretty much impossible to even think about fighting back.
Okay, so we've talked about the mind. Now let's talk about the body, the physical reality of this life. Because from the outside, it might have actually looked pretty luxurious. But that luxury, it was just a gilded cage.
This really breaks it down, the illusion versus the reality. Yeah, you might have luxurious rooms, but you had absolutely no privacy, ever. You're wearing fine clothes and jewels, but you don't own a single thing. You get to learn about art and philosophy, but you have zero hope of ever being free. Every single privilege was really just another golden bar on the cage, another reminder of how powerless you truly were.
And their own bodies? Not theirs. Not at all. The master decided what they ate, how they exercised. They were forced to endure painful cosmetic treatments just because the master wanted them to look a certain way. If the master traveled, they were packed up and brought along like a piece of luggage, like portable property. And the scariest part of all this, there was no help, no legal rights, no one to turn to. You were completely and totally alone. So yeah, that metaphor of a living doll, it's just so brutally perfect. Draped in silk and gold, treated like a beautiful object to show off how rich and tasteful your owner is. But under all that finery was a human being who had been stripped of every choice, every bit of control over their own life. So, after hearing all this, you might be wondering, why dig this up? Why does it matter? Well, it matters because these stories, as hard as they are to hear, teach us some really big lessons about power, about how societies work, and about the incredible resilience of the human spirit.
The first thing, and maybe the most important, is this number, 1. We have to remember the 1. Because behind all the big abstract history lessons and all the statistics, there was always one person. A single human being with their own hopes, their own dreams, their own fears, all of which were crushed. They weren't just numbers, they were lives. And we have to remember that to understand the real human cost of Rome's glory.
But here's the thing that's just incredible. Even in a system designed to completely crush them, the human spirit refused to be extinguished. It survived in these tiny acts of resistance. Maybe it was a look shared between two people who understood, a whispered word in their own language, a small secret moment of kindness. These weren't big rebellions that would change the world, but in their own way, they were huge victories for humanity against a system that tried to erase it.
And that really brings us to the core lesson here. This quote says it all. You just can't separate the magnificent achievements of a civilization from the cruelty it was built on. So often, what we call progress or glory comes with a hidden price tag, a human cost. And that price is almost always paid by the people with the least power.
Which, of course, brings it all back to us, right now. Because these stories from the past, they're not just stories. They're a challenge. They force us to look around at our own world and ask some really uncomfortable questions. What injustices are we choosing to ignore today? What suffering do we look past for our own comfort, for our own progress? You have to wonder, what will historians of the future say about us and the things we chose not to see?